Another banger.
What's up, YouTube? Imagine moving 40-foot containers across war zones. Then one day, swapping it all for cargo vans and corporate contracts. That's Anthony's story. From West Point to the front lines of logistics, disciplined hit his entire career. And why sometimes the best career advice comes from family, man. So again, tap in, family. Enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for being here today. That's fantastic. Next question would be, what are some of the tough moments early on when you start the company, or like the business? So I know you had your sister as somebody you could, kind of really lean on initially, but do you remember any of like the early days, those 15 years ago, where you're like, man, I need to just start out, like creating your LLC, building your team, the capital, all that stuff. Like, how did that actually come about? And, how did you make that into a success?
Well, so, for me, I would say, building a business, and it's a small business, really, I don't know if any school will really prepare you for that other than kind of jumping in and doing it. I do recall, in the beginning, just doing a lot of things myself. I mean, you're kind of by yourself, and, if you don't do it, it's almost like, no one else is going to do it. But I'll tell you, I remember when we launched, when we started actually, delivering per the contract. I remember the first, I would say 60 or so days, I was probably working, who's definitely 7 days a week, maybe pulling 18, 20-hour days. And I remember like everything was kind of going really well. I got everything, got it on my processes organized. How do I want to do everything from organizing the drivers all the way down to, how do you open, how do you close, all kinds of facets of the business. But I pushed so hard, and I remember that Thanksgiving, this was 2019, I ate some bad quail, I don't know, for Thanksgiving, and I got really, really sick, and I still went into work those next 2 days. I was really, really sick, and I remember at that point it was like, hey, you can't do this all by yourself. So I think that was probably the first hard lesson I learned. You just, you definitely have to do a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. You got to roll up your sleeves and get to work. But at the end of the day, that's not sustainable. You can't do it all. You need you need to kind of delegate. You need to have other people that you can trust. And that was very hard for me, because it's your baby, right?
Trying to delegate is tough, man. Yeah. And I think, Anthony, because we spoke with you, one of our conversations, but I remember, I was trying to do the same thing with my company, trying to get like a dispatcher, for example, to kind of help out with making sure that, my drivers can get the loads. They can take care of like, the paperwork with the brokers and whatnot. And so I think you're like, dude, that if that was one of the lessons like I would learn early on would be like delegating early. So, it's kind of great that you actually talk about that as well. And I think, yeah, that goes to pretty much, if you want to be a good leader, you have only so much capacity. And if you're the one working in your business, you don't have enough time to kind of think about different ideas. To your point earlier on, how do you actually create like a process around the day-to-day rigor of owning the business, right? So I think you rightfully say that, being able to kind of delegate is super important. So that's pretty cool. And thanks for sharing some of that, those early day struggles.
Oh yeah.
Now, Anthony, when did it stop being a hustle and become a real business? Like what was that timeline from the grind to, okay, you know what, this is something that I see myself doing for some time. Like, it's actually a well-oiled machine, and I feel like I'm doing pretty good.
So, that's a great point. I would say for me, that first lesson, so one of the things is I still do the Army Reserve. So it was back in, I think it was about January of 2020. So I was selected for battalion command, which, as a reservist, I mean, that takes a lot of your time. So I remember, I was thinking, wow, like, how am I going to do this job in the Army and then also run the business day to day? So again, so it goes back to, I had to basically set everything up to where, I wasn't in the operation, I wasn't working in the business, I'm more working off the business. So I had to make that shift. So I couldn't be so critical to the day-to-day operations that if I wasn't at work, everything would crumble. So for me, bringing up an operations manager, my HR manager, making sure that she could pretty much run off my intent. I for me, like, I don't need things to be the way I would necessarily solve it or do it. I had to also learn, if it's not how I would have done it, maybe it actually is better than if I were gonna do it myself. So that was the big thing. But I would say making that transition from, okay,
Okay.
like I don't have to be there 21 hours a day, working for things to be successful. That was probably the second big lesson I learned.
That's amazing. I think your the army has actually made you like has possibly made you a better businessman, right? 'Cause at that point, you're like, dude, there's no way I cannot go inside because I've been called up to duty, and I need my company to continue operating without me. And so I think you are almost like forced into delegating and actually creating trust with some of your employees. So I think that's really, really cool. And I feel like that might have been maybe like the mindset that kind of probably has made you successful to now. Because I think you can actually, it's the same thing like with our kids, right? You have kids that have kids. When you feel that they can go into the world and be successful, I feel like that's probably like the biggest gift you can have and give to the world, right? Because you're like, man, I'm not worried about this guy. He can go or she can go and just do whatever and be fine, you know? And so that sounds like, you get your baby from like the infancy stage to like an adult, which is pretty cool, Anthony.
Yeah, and that's a really great analogy. Yeah, I always consider the business like another one of my children in a way. So, but that's a great way to look at it. And you can't just blindly trust, right?
You cannot. That's the other thing I wanted to ask you. How do you choose the right people, man? Because like people can completely tank your business. So what is your process for identifying good people?
I would say, for me, I was very fortunate. My HR manager is amazing. Um, you know, Sometimes you kind of get connected with people, and she was kind of a friend of a friend, so to speak. But I was extremely fortunate. I mean, without her, I wouldn't have. I think we've hired, we're probably north of 600 drivers in all these years. And sometimes you get, I don't want to say luck, but sometimes you're very fortunate. You get blessed with people in your life, right? But then I've had a lot of operations people over the years, and you know, sometimes people kind of peak, and maybe they get burnt out a little bit. So you have to be able to build the bench, I would say. So I always, I have to think about, who's going to be the next operations manager, who's going to be the next whatever. You got to kind of develop people. You can't just hold all that knowledge and keep it to yourself. You have to be you have to be able to share that knowledge and ability, and you'll grow. I mean, people will grow under you, but I'd say that's the trick for me. I'm always worried about, okay, what
Yep.
if I need to replace my ops manager or someone else?
Yep. I think that's valid. The two things that you said so far that just kind of like a quick summary of what we've discussed. I think the first one would be the first 90 days, well, 60 to 90 days. I feel like for any business, I'm going to be hell. Like I've been there myself, very many hours a day constantly. It's very stressful. And then the other thing that you said that I really like was, you don't want to, at some point, you do not work to work in the business, but you want to work on the business. I think that's powerful words by you, Anthony. And then the last thing you just touched on right now, I think is very important, which goes to like the personnel, right? You want to be able to build the bench, like you got your starters, that's great. But in the event that somebody gets hurt, you got to be able to put somebody in. That way the business can continue going. So those three so far, my takeaways, and I like that. I'm sure we got many, many more things we can touch on.